2 minutes left. The YouTube process is in progress. Very good. Here we are. Perfect. We have 43 participants at the moment. We had approximately 110 registration. Okay. So that's good. What time is it? That's 1 minute left. Good. I think we can start. I want to welcome everybody to who participates to this so-called community of expertise. We are in the May session and we have an exciting program in front of us for the coming 90 minutes. I remember you that this session will be recorded and is currently broadcasted on YouTube. So if you have any concern, please consider to leave the session. And I'm going now to walk you through the rules. The session is named, as you can read here, representation of clinical information in short. We have three main speakers, Jane Miller and Jan Green from SNOMED International, and Sarah El Amin from MHRA. I'm going to say a few words more about them. Job like this virtual meeting requires some rules, and for those who already participated, you may discover some repetition, but it's important that we all understand how that works. So everybody is on mute when somebody is speaking. Only one microphone is on. Are you in the participants group, or are you a panelist? You can post questions. For the panelists, it is easier if they do that orally in due time, but for the participants, you have a Q&A facility, which I'm going to show you. It may happen that you can speak, and that will decide the conductor. Sorry for that. If you speak, please be concise, and so that leaves space for other questions or comments. And you may show your approval to questions or to something which is said by thumb up, for instance. You will have the opportunity to answer some questions at the very end of the webinar. To see how to access the Q&A facility, you may move your mouse on the screen, and that activates the bar below. Sometimes it is up, but most of the time it is below, where you see Q&A. Please don't consider to use the chat box because that would oblige us to monitor the two. Q&A facility is good, and panelists may also answer questions from the Q&A during the talks. So if it is a very specific question, for instance, and you can have a dialogue. The Q&A facility looks like this. So when you open it, you see Mr. Robert Stegway, it's not me, was asking a question. Can I ask you a question? And then I was playing the role of a panelist and answered to that question. And he answered again to the question. You can also, as I said before, express your opinion by moving the thumb, which will, of course, be seen on the screen. The more thumb up, the higher comes the question when we have many. So that's also an important thing to say. As I said before, the meeting, the webinar is recorded. It is even broadcasted, as I said, also on YouTube. It is a safe place to be. Zoom has increased tremendously the security features since its launch in 2019. So this session is password protected. Each of the participants and panelists has a personal link and is invited not to share that link, otherwise your name appears more than once. And at the end, so you have some questions to answer. Our panelist and speaker first and panelist today, pardon me, are here on the screen. I'm going to start with the ladies. Jane Miller is working with SNOMED International for a few years. I think I met her long ago. She has the role especially to establish and maintain the relationship with other standards and standards in general. Jan Green is also a long runner in SNOMED International. He is also participating to various groups in the health IT space, such as ISO TC215, sometimes in working group 6, sometimes in the subcommittee 1, like it was this week. Sarah El Amin, I have to turn my head to read that. She is an associate signal assessor working in the terminologies team in the vigilance and risk management of medicines department at MHRA. She is involved in safety, quality, and efficacy of medicines, including the provision of information to promote safe and effective use. We have as panelist Kate Bateman. She's also working in the same space. She is a coordinator for pharmacovigilance information and manages the terminology team with the vigilance and risk management of medicine departments at MHRA. Toni Morrison is working for and with SNOMED International as well. She's also well known in our space. She participates quite frequently to health IT project on behalf of SNOMED International. Barry Hammonds is, I have also to read, he was involved in the implementation of MedDRA, and he's a former MedDRA Management Board member and currently member of the MedDRA expert panel. And he represents currently MedDRA MSSO in UNICOM. So also a long experience in the space of terminologies. Christopher Jarvis is unfortunately not with us today. Christophe is working at EDQM in Strasbourg And actually, you see the smile, he's on holiday these days. So that's the reason why probably he smiles on the picture. Well, this is the team. For the moderation, we are twinning Robert Stegway and myself. Robert Stegway is the chair of SNTC251, and he is currently the lead of the UNICOM work package #1 also, where the standard development organizations meet to support the UNICOM project. Myself, my name is Christian Hay. I'm the deputy lead of the same work package #1, and I'm also convening the ISO TC215 working group 6, where IDMP has been developed and is maintained. Our agenda. So we have 2 speakers for the first, I would say, slot. So they are going to address representation of clinical information related to medication using SNOMED and other standards. And then we will have a view on the practical experience from MHRA. With this, oh yes, and don't forget the questions in the Q&A facility. So with that, I want to give the floor to Jane Miller, I suppose. And
okay, thank you very much, Christian. So Ian and I are going to do this first presentation as Christian's already said. I want to stress that in putting this presentation together, quite a number of people have been involved. And because it cuts across, it starts with SNOMED, but it cuts across and talks about interoperability between standards and the use of different standards. We've worked with Robert Stegway as lead for Work Package 1 and our colleagues from other standards organisations within Work Package 1. We've also gone to our membership particularly who are using the SNOMED CT drug model and trying to work with it with other standards and with others who are working in the regulatory space. So I hope that you understand that we've tried to put this together with other standards in mind and not just SNOMED CT. But really what we're focusing on is illustrating the use of SNOMED and other standards to represent you and use clinical information across a number of scenarios and across some of the scenarios which are coming across the UNICOM landscape, which is obviously focusing on the IDMP implementation. But where we wanted to look at was, okay, so how then do the other standards fit and facilitate that implementation of IDMP, which across the globe, because SNOMED International, as you know, is global. So whilst this project, the UNICOM project, is focused on IDMP, is focused on Europe, we look wider as well. And I know that UNICOM is also doing that. We've also identified the need for mappings between some terminologies for different purposes, such as regulatory, legal and standards requirements, because obviously unless a standard is mandated, people are using different standards and mandations are different in different countries. And then looking at the effort and the risks involved in maintaining these maps. And really we want to try to lead to a coordinated development and maintenance of standards and terminologies relevant to the UNICOM landscape. What we wanted to try and do was put some pictures together about what this looks like or can look like. So that's it with the objectives. Thank you, Christian. Next one, please. So the scenarios we've covered are sharing of the medication summary, medication treatment plan, ambulatory prescribing and dispensing, hospital medication workflow, clinical decision support based on formulary and decision rules, the medicinal product dictionaries, making available those formulary and decision rules, and then adverse event reporting for sort of the global pharmacovigilance. What we have excluded, because we can't do everything in 50 minutes, is clinical trials, claims reimbursement, routine medication using surveillance, and cross-border sharing, prescribing and dispensing. And when somebody raised that with us as a feedback, we felt that's a huge one. Again, we can't cover it, but I think you will see that actually the way we're approaching things does actually point across the ability to do cross-border. Next slide, please, Christian. So in setting this scene, we're outlining an approach for each of the scenarios that could be implemented, both using national and global standards. Could be. Others may say, well, actually, no, we don't want to do that, or we disagree. We're proposing these are options. Actual implementations may and will differ depending on the jurisdiction. There's no implementation guidance currently available for these exemplars. And the exemplars really are illustrative of how things could work. And you will see us using different tenses like are, could, should. And that's quite deliberate because we want to be quite provocative and get some feedback. We welcome feedback. Obviously, question time is limited, but we welcome feedback so that we can actually work further on these scenarios and then share them and make them available. We do not provide a recommendation on which standards to use or how to use them. The examples are for illustrative purposes and to promote that community discussion, as I say, and we are open to any feedback that you might have. Next slide, please. So starting with the first scenario of sharing medication information, a healthcare professional needs to know relevant current and past medication that a new or existing patient has or has been using, is or has been. And in taking this, we know that there are several IHE content specifications available for doing this. So that's one example straight away of standards which are currently in use. These include, and these three are the medication entry module, referencing a single medication list, which covers past and current medication, which covers, as we said, this scenario, medication treatment plan. And then that gives you that more detailed information over time. And medication information, as we know, is mandatory and patient summary standards. So here's an example of a couple of those. We've got the ISO standard for the International Patient Summary, International Standards Organization, by the way, and HL7 CDA, the Clinical Document Architecture, and FHIR, which have implementation guides which cover the International Patient Summary. So underpinning that, and as part of those standards, SNOMED CT codes can be used to capture the indication for which a medication is prescribed. SNOMED CT codes can be used to capture medication, dosage, route of administration, and target site. Can you move on? That's it. So this is a description of that. And we've also indicated other standards on here, which you'll see. So we've already touched on HL7 CDA and the FHIR IPS document. You obviously, in some jurisdictions, you're going to have local medication identifiers. ICD-10 may be used for indications. Some users might use things like ICPC. And then the SNOMED codes, which we've already talked about, which can be used for this. And these make up this patient summary. And if you actually look at if you take the HL7, they have got right down to the coded detail of that. So you can straight away, you're picking up standards that are being used internationally. And then along the bottom, we've got some of we've got the IHE International Patient Summary Profile, which can be used to construct a patient summary. You've got the ISO work, 27269. And then you've obviously got the medication content modules. So this is how the standards fit together. Can fit together for that. Ambulatory prescribing of medication. Here, the doctor is prescribing medication for an individual patient. The IHE community prescribing profile describes the workflow and references both SNOMED CT and HL7 CDA. So again, interoperability between the standards. HL7 FHIR or CDA could be used to represent the prescription. And it will depend on the jurisdiction where you are as to which you might be using or considering planning to use in the future. Both the prescribed medication and the current medications are identified using locally developed, nationally mandated identifiers. Some may actually be SNOMED CT coded using the model we've got. SNOMED CT codes are used to describe the problem list and the indication for which the medication is prescribed, and also can be used to describe any known allergies the patient has, leveraging the substances and findings hierarchies in SNOMED CT. So you've got that link between them. Thank you. So in describing that, here is the prescription, and you've got the HL7 FHIR or CDA, the local medication identifiers, and SNOMED CT linking across from the electronic health record to the prescription with the problems, the indications, allergies, and any other type of information. And in describing this, you could have used the ISO 17523 requirements for electronic prescriptions, and you've also got available the IHE community prescription. Thank you. And then moving on to the ambulatory dispensing of medication, the patient or their representative goes to the local pharmacy to get the prescription filled. And here you've got the IHE, the option of the IHE community dispensing profile, describing the workflow, and again referencing HL7, CDA, and SNOMED CT. And also HL7 FHIR or CDA could be used to represent the dispensing record. The dispensed medication is identified using the locally developed, nationally mandated medication identifiers, which may be SNOMED codes in some instances. In addition, you've got the GS1 item and batch number and expiration date of the dispensed medication, which may or may not be recorded, but it's becoming more and more used. And the SNOMED CT codes can be used to describe the indication for which the medication is dispensed and to record the dosage instructions provided. Next, please. And here's that picture again of that, with down the left-hand side some of the standards which make up the dispensing record and the information around it. FHIR, CDA, local medication identifiers, GS1 item and batch number, SNOMED CT code for indications and allergies, feeding in to support the dispensing record. And then you've got the IHE community dispense profile, which can be used to pull that together, and obviously the ISO 19293 requirements for record of dispensing. So that is actually the global standard use there. Thank you. And I will hand over now to Ian.
Okay, so thank you, Jane. So moving on, let's consider a fairly straightforward medication, current medication from a patient summary. So this patient, Mary Contrary, is on some regular medication. So she's on ramipril, she's on simvastatin. And each of those medications have a dosage. So ramipril is 5 milligrams, simvastatin 20 milligrams, and they're both tablets. And then there are some dosage instructions. So one to be taken daily and one to be taken at bedtime. There's also some PRN, so as required medication, sumatriptan, 50 milligram tablets, and diclofenac topical gel. And there are some dosage instructions with each of those. So one to be taken when required for migraine, and then with diclofenac, apply to the knees twice daily when needed for pain relief. Next slide, please. So if we look at the detail within that patient summary and consider the codes which we currently have in SNOMED and are modeled in SNOMED. So the medication text, if we take the first example here of ramipril 5 milligram tablets, and there's one to be taken daily. So within SNOMED, we have a code. So 408051007, you don't need to remember the code. That refers to a product containing precisely ramipril 5 milligrams, one each conventional release oral tablet. We also have a dose quantity, which is 1. And we'll talk about that in a while when I show you a view of the SNOMED drug model. We also have individual dose frequency, so we have a SNOMED code for once daily. And then we have route of administration, or ROA, so we have a SNOMED code for oral route. So within SNOMED, we have all the various detail that's required to tell you that you need to take a ramipril 5 milligram tablet once a day. And the same with simvastatin below. So simvastatin tablets, I'm not going to go through each as I did with the first example, but in exactly the same way. So each of those will have a precise SNOMED code, including the individual dose frequency where it's once a day at bedtime, not just once daily. But if we then consider the last two examples here, so those are the examples of medication which are taken as required. There's some additional information, if you like, which SNOMED provides codes for, particularly the indication. So if you're taking sumatriptan, then the indication is for migraine disorder. And if you're taking diclofenac gel, then the reason is that you're in pain. That's why you're taking it. And particularly with that one, there is also a site of administration, so it's to be applied to both knees. And the route of administration, as it's a gel, is cutaneous route rather than oral route. Next slide, please. So if we then consider, so Jane's talked about really the out of hospital view, if you like. So let's consider the in-hospital view. So hospital medication workflow. So if you're a doctor working on a ward within a hospital, you'll order medication for an individual patient. When you do that, the hospital pharmacy validates the order, and there may well be a conversation between the pharmacist and the doctor to advise the doctor on the prescription. The hospital pharmacy then prepares the medication and transports it to the ward, and the doctor or nurse then administers that medication and makes a record of it within the patient notes. So the IHE hospital medication workflow profile describes this process, and it references both HL7 version 2 and also SNOMED. The HL7 v2, so version 2 or fire messages, are used then to communicate between systems within the hospital. And the medication is identified using either locally developed or national mandated identifiers. And these may be SNOMED codes. They don't have to be, but they may be. As previously, as Jay mentioned, it's becoming more common now for GS1 to be used to record the item, the batch number, and also possibly the expiration date of the administered medication, and that's recorded within the record. SNOMED codes are then used to describe the indication for which the medication is prescribed, and also to record any known allergies of this patient. Next slide, please. So as previously, as Jane's run through, this is just a pictorial view of what I've just described. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got order medication, you've got a validation of the order, and then on the right-hand side, you're preparing the medication and administering it. So if you consider, as I said, the standards that impact on that, you have an IHE hospital medication workflow, but within that, that can be supported by HL7v2 and FHIR messages. You may well have local medication identifiers. You can use SNOMED codes for indication and allergies, and you'll have the GS1 item and batch number. So a number of standards there, all working together. Next slide, please. If you then take that a little further and think about the formulary and medication management and how these both together can assist a clinical decision support system. So CDS, or clinical decision support, is assumed to be part, or at least work in concert with, an electronic health record system as used by clinicians. So a CDS system has its own internal set of identifiers for all concepts it refers to. And these include medications, indications, contraindications, adverse effect, interactions, and others. And some of these may be SNOMED CT concepts, or at least match directly with SNOMED CT concept models. And this includes the model for both international and national medicinal products. The CDS system itself will map to local medication identifiers to support the medication process, and these may be SNOMED codes. And also local identifiers are then used for diagnosis, problems, conditions, and allergies. And these are used within the electronic health record system, and some of these may also be SNOMED codes. The CDS system itself will then use its mappings and its rules to provide the appropriate decision support alerts within the medication process. Next slide, please. So if you think of that pictorially, on the left-hand side here, you've got a formulary and you have a number of decision rules which feed into that. So the formulary itself will have IDMP, it will have local medication identifiers, and the decision rules may well be SNOMED CT codes, which cover conditions, allergies, and dose forms, all of which will form internally within the system's decision rules. If you then move forward and think how that then impacts on an electronic health record system, so how does that information get there? Well, it uses a number of things. So on the top here, you'll be using the SNOMED drug model and also the model which supports national extensions. And from that, you may well get some local identifiers, and they will feed into the electronic health record system. The electronic health record system itself will have, may have SNOMED codes for problems, for allergies, for current medication, all of which exist within a patient record. And that then will then inform then the prescription and medication order on the right-hand side here. And within, as we're focusing on standards, ISO itself has an ISO standard 22756, which details the requirements for a CDS knowledge base. Next slide, please. So here's an example of clinical decision support. So this is looking at a patient who has cholangiolitis, and the drug prescribed is going to be pravastatin, so a 20 milligram dose of pravastatin. But if you look at the top box here, any treatment using a statin is contraindicated in any patient that has active liver disease. Now, SNOMED itself is an ontology, so when we talk about a single concept, we talk about a single concept and their subtypes. So in the smaller box below, so the one which starts with drug, equals, and then two left pointing arrows, that's an actual SNOMED expression, which means that the rule is actually looking for anything which is a product containing 3-hydroxy, 3-methyl butyryl coenzyme A reductase inhibitor. and any of its subtypes, and also then is identifying disorder of liver and also looking at any of its subtypes. So because this patient has cholangiolitis, and if you look at the hierarchy, which is on the bottom left here, cholangiolitis, you can go up through the hierarchy and find there is a subtype of disorder of liver. So in this particular patient, pravastatin is contraindicated because it's contraindicated in patients with active liver disease, and as the patient has cholangiolitis, which is an inflammatory disease of the liver, pravastatin shouldn't be prescribed. So the CDS system, if you like, will put an alert within the electronic health record system, notifying the clinician that this is the case and encouraging a different treatment path. Next slide, please. So if we then move on and think about medicinal product dictionaries. So in medicinal product dictionary, so within UNICOM, we have examples from Z-Index and Vidal, but they collect and structure information relevant to the identification of medicinal products. So the dictionaries themselves provide a key source of information to a national drug database as maintained by a national competent authority. And the key output of this is the way it's made available within an electronic health record system. And this is done through the formulary and decision rules. There will be local medication identifiers with mapping from local to ISO IDMP identifiers. Those same IDMP identifiers are there for globally unique identification, and there are some proposed future links with the WHO collaborating centres in Oslo and Uppsala for either the ATC codes or the PHPID codes. SNOMED CT also has a national drug extension. So this is based on the SNOMED medicinal product concept model. It includes models for substances, strengths, dose forms, and units of presentation. And it's been produced and developed so it's in harmony with the IDMP standard 11615. Also supporting this will be HL7 fire structures for the exchange with formulary and medication management. And then we're developing an EDQM to SNOMED map for dose forms, and with a MedDRA to SNOMED map also supporting then for indication and adverse effects and other issues. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned this previously about SNOMED having a model for defining clinical drugs. So this is an example using the SNOMED drug concept model. So this is looking at a product containing precisely amlodipine, 10 milligrams. The amlodipine is amlodipine besylate, and it's conventional release oral tablet. And as you go down the boxes, if you like, so the first lilac box you come to gives you its parent. So it's the one above it in the hierarchy is a product containing only amlodipine in oral dose form. And then there are some attributes and values which really define the concept we're talking about. So we will model it, we'll model the concept within SNOMED with has manufactured dose form, and that has a value of conventional release oral tablet. You then have an attribute for has units of presentation, so it tells you that it's a tablet. We then have the count of base of the active ingredients. So we've moved on now, so we're looking at using individual values. So that has a value of 1. We then have precise active ingredient, which is amlodipine besylate. We have basis of strength substance, which is amlodipine. We have presentation strength, which is 10, so this refers to 10 milligrams. It has a presentation strength numerator, which tells you that it's milligrams. We have a strength denominator, which is 1, and then the has presentation strength denominator, which is tablet as a unit of presentation. And each drug within SNOMED will be, each clinical drug within SNOMED will be modeled using these attributes, either the same or a subset of these that you see on the screen in front of you. Next slide, please. We also have a model for clinical dose form. So if we're talking about a conventional release oral tablet, that has a parent concept within SNOMED of oral dose form, but there are also a number of attributes and values which help to define that within SNOMED. So we have basic dose form, which is a tablet. We has dose for intended site, which is oral. We have dose form release characteristic, which in this case refers to a conventional release. We also have dose form transformation, which in this case there is no transformation. But then we also have dose form administration method, which in this case is swallow. Next slide, please. So if we then look at the medicinal product dictionaries and look at that pictorially as we did previously. So on the left-hand side here, you have a national drug database, and into that will feed IDMP identifiers and also EDQM for the route of administration and dose forms, and also MedDRA codes for indication and adverse effects. As we then move across from left to right, that's supported by the SNOMED drug model and also the SNOMED National Drug Extension model. And that will then feed into the formulary in terms of IDMP and local medication identifiers, and also having SNOMED codes for disorders, allergies, dose forms, which are all specified within decision support rules. And as previously, there are a number of standards which impact on that. There's the ISO 19256, which are requirements for medicinal product dictionary systems. There's also the ISO 22756 requirements for the CDS knowledge base. And one of the things that we're looking at developing, so additional artifacts, if you like, is an EDQM and MedDRA maps to SNOMED. Next slide, please. And over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, I'm going to touch now on the final use case which we described, which is adverse event reporting. And this is the process as described in pharmacovigilance regulations and coordinated through the International Council on Harmonization, ICH. 8L7 version 3 is used to represent an ICSR, the individual case safety report. And MedDRA is used and required by ICH for history, problem, and adverse event recording. And as we've talked about already, at the moment, SNOMED codes those history, problem, and adverse events in the electronic health record system. So having a SNOMED to MedDRA map that is maintained and updated has been developed to support this. So that you've got the flow from the clinical information, which is where we started with this whole presentation, through into regulation. And obviously it will depend on the region and the jurisdiction, whether there's any mandation around any of this. EDQM standard terms will be used for route of administration and dose forms, and IDMP identifiers and batch number are needed for reporting. So local identifiers identify the medication in the electronic health record system, and you can use the SNOMED National Drug Extension to provide the corresponding IDMP compliant identifiers, MPID, the PHPID, and the substance IDs if they're required. So here again, you're mixing the standards and coordinating them together, and we've got interoperability between the standards to support adverse event reporting. And could you move on, please? Next slide. Thank you. Now, poor person with the striped shirt has fallen over here. That's meant to denote the adverse event reporting. So we've got the electronic health record here, the electronic health record system, with a separate, because this is often the case at this point in time, individual case safety reporting. So you've got the data, and you've got in the EHR, already in there, the local medication identifiers and all the SNOMED CT information. But then you've got the ICSR, which we talked about on the previous slide, which are represented with an HL7 CDA, is required to use within Europe and in other parts of the world. The IDMP medication identifiers is moving towards that, using EDQM for the route of administration and dose forms, and the MedDRA codes for history, indications, and reactions. So there's no linkage between those two in many instances as it stands at the moment. And we're tied together with the European Medicines Agency, EU ICSR implementation guide. Next slide, please. So what we're working towards is actually exactly the same picture, but with the linkage and the pre-population of the individual case safety report with the data coming from the electronic health record system, so that you've got it source data coming in, and then creating the maps, which are standardized maps created in relation to EDQM and MedDRA, and local maps to the IDMP medication identifiers into the ICSR case safety reports, and using the standards which are required for the ICSR. And so you've got that connection, and you don't have to actually, you're not having to put in information twice and collect stuff twice. The next slide, please. So coming to a conclusion here, we've talked about a number of scenarios and the use of different standards which are available across Europe and globally for deriving prescribing, dispensing, pharmacovigilance, and clinical decision support. And we've focused on getting that information directly from the electronic health record system. And we don't apologize for talking a lot about SNOMED, because we're talking about clinical information, and in many countries now, SNOMED CT is the preferred choice of the clinical terminology in the electronic health record system. What we are is ideally positioned to support improved use of the clinical information feeding into the pharmaceutical domain and the different cases we've talked about here. We've talked about a number of maps to support the integration and the flow of information, particularly into the regulatory space, where there is very, very strict guidance and rules about what can and can't be used. And I think that is key. What we wanted to try and do with this, and I hope people come back to us with some feedback, is have we captured some of the key aspects of UNICOM across the different work packages? And if the answer is yes, and then there is a need for these different maps, how are we going to determine the maps that are going to be developed within UNICOM, the process for maintaining and updating those maps as UNICOM progresses, and also the quality aspect of it? I mean, we both Ian and I picked up the fact that quality needed to be in here, and we've forgotten to put it on the slide, so my apologies, but quality for both of us is a key aspect. And then how do we ensure that that work is consistently resourced across UNICOM, so that actually we've got single solutions which actually can be used across UNICOM, and then for actually looking after these maps after the UNICOM project is finished? Because once you have developed a map, you've put all of that effort into a map, and you've got standards organizations who have put effort and knowledge into it. we actually need to look at maintaining them, updating, so there is a single source of truth that can be used globally for these different scenarios that we've actually talked about. So these are things to be considered, I think, as a result of what we've talked about. And the next slide, please. And in finishing, what we've tried to do is pull together a number of resources that people can use, the UNICOM project resources, we talked about the SNOMED model, medicinal product model. There's a browser for SNOMED. We talked about IDMP, and we're pointing to some of that we've had at a SNOMED Expo. We're pointing to HL7, IHE, and also the SNOMED International Global Patient Set, which is now looking as if it's going to be more and more used across the globe as a set that can be shared for cross-border and with countries that are not SNOMED International members. So we hope these resources will be useful for you. And with that, I think I will bring the presentation to a close. Ian, is there anything you want to add?
No, that's fine. Carry on.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jan, for this very detailed overview of complex, I would say, vision. But I think it has become much clearer along your slides and your comments. Now, I would like, without more transition, first remember you as participants to use the Q&A facility if you have questions to ask. I see there is already one, but we may have space for more. And with that, I will pass the floor to Sarah, who is going to present the experience from the MHRA. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. So my name is Sarah, and I'm an associate signal assessor working in the vigilance and risk management of medicines at the MHRA based in the UK. And what I'll be doing today with my presentation is explaining the impact of the SNOMED to MedDRA maps in our work at the MHRA. Next slide, please. So what we'll be going through today is yellow card reporting and our link to clinical systems, the benefits of clinical system integration. I'll be explaining some clinical IT systems that we have in the UK here, the development of the maps and the benefits of them, and then any further questions and next steps as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the yellow card scheme is the UK's system for collecting information on suspected adverse drug reactions to medicines. So just to give some background information, anyone can report an adverse event to a drug or a vaccine through different reporting methods. So patients, parents, carers, healthcare professionals can report to us via email, via a dedicated phone line. We have the Yellow Card website, as well as a phone app, which is available on iOS, Apple, and Android. And we also receive yellow cards directly from healthcare professionals through their integrated electronic health record systems, which come through straight into our system. And more recently, since last year, we have a dedicated coronavirus yellow card website, which is used specifically to report any adverse drug reactions to the COVID vaccinations. Next slide, please. So our yellow card reporting form is now integrated in both primary, which includes general practice, community pharmacy, dental services, and also in secondary care systems, so specialists and hospitals. And it is a core requirement in GP systems. So since 2010, we've had System 1, which has been embedded. 2016, Vision has been created for some GPs, and also EMIS since 2019. And also in secondary care, we have MI Databank, Cerner, and Ulysses. And the graph here shows that there is a steady decrease in reporting by healthcare professionals through the paper route, and a steady increase in clinical system usage. And this trend will probably continue over the coming years, where it becomes easier to report through clinical systems rather than through paper. Next slide, please. So this graph further demonstrates the change in reporting methods over the recent years, focusing on two of our most common healthcare professional reporters, so general practitioners and hospital pharmacists, showing a decrease in paper reporting and an increase in clinical system reporting for any adverse drug reactions. Next slide, please.
Sarah, may I ask you to speak a bit louder because your voice is quite far away?
Okay.
Thank you.
So there are many benefits to healthcare professionals using clinical systems to report adverse drug reactions. So for example, it's available to them already, and you just need an internet connection and they can submit a yellow card at any time from anywhere. It's easy to use, so they don't need to duplicate information and re-enter any data. It's already populated in their system, and they can send that directly through to us. And it contains all the relevant information that we would need for reporting an adverse drug reaction. So to have medical history, any events, concomitant medications. This helps them because they are under pressure, and it doesn't take any extra time really from them. They can just submit the report directly through their system. It also allows real-time feedback. So there's a direct contact between us and the healthcare professionals. So we can follow up with them directly rather than posting letters out, which would take time. And for them, it would take time to use paper to report back to us as well. Next slide, please. As well as benefits for healthcare professionals, there's many benefits for the MHRA. And the report we receive is directly integrated into our case processing system called Sentinel. So that's a database we use at the MHRA, in contrast to when we receive paper reports, where you have to scan the report to make sure it's uploaded, and then you have to copy all the information from the paper into the system. So that cuts out a lot of steps, and it makes it more efficient, and it reduces data entry requirements, therefore increasing the speed of ADR processing. And this allows our assessors to analyze the data rather than case processing. It increases accuracy and transparency of the data because the data is direct from the healthcare professional, and we do not need to change it in any way or assume that they've put something down where we can't read it, but it's all directly electronically through their system. It reduces paper burden, so it's more eco-friendly, and the logistics of paper reporting is cut out. And we also have a two-way communication with them, so they can provide information to us, and we are able to provide information directly into their system as well by providing promotional material. Next slide, please. So to give a bit more background in terms of clinical systems that the Yellow Card report is currently integrated with, we have System 1 since 2010, and we have Vision as well. And in 2019, 93% of all GP reports were received electronically, and 76% accounted for GP reports through clinical systems. So it shows there's a high percentage of reports coming through their clinical systems into our database. And this is increasing year on year. We're seeing this trend increasing year on year. Next slide, please. In terms of secondary care systems, we have also integrated MI Data Bank into about 50 NHS hospitals, which is used mainly by medicine information pharmacists. And we have also integrated into the Cerner program, and the use of this is expanding into different trusts around the UK. And results from this pilot in the trust will be influencing further uptake into other trusts in the UK. Next slide, please. And following a successful pilot, the yellow card is also integrated into the EMIS system, with 60 practices being early adopters in 2019. And in 2020, this was continued to be rolled out into further sites. This is an important milestone because then it makes clinical systems available in about 93% of GP practices across the UK, which is good for us because then we were able to receive yellow card reports from these GP practices in a very easy way. Next slide, please. So the information from the previous slides shows that reporting through clinical systems is becoming more popular for healthcare professionals with the increased access and benefits to them, therefore enabling them to report adverse drug reports to us. And to bring this back to the main topic of the SNOMED and MedDRA maps, the integration into clinical systems is hugely important for the MHRA. However, there's still a limiting step in the process, as healthcare professional systems use SNOMED terminology, and at the MHRA, we use the MedDRA terminology. So when we receive cases from clinical system, the vast majority of the clinical information within the structured fields was not populating automatically, as the two terminologies couldn't be translated. So this process, before the maps were developed, I will go into in the next slides. So we were very keen at the MHRA to work with SNOMED and the MSSO to develop the two maps that would allow the two terminologies to interface. So as you've heard, there's two maps, one that translates SNOMED to MedDRA and one that translates MedDRA to SNOMED. And at the MHRA, we utilize the first map that I've highlighted in this slide, SNOMED to MedDRA. And the maps were developed using the most commonly used terms, which is around 7,400 terms. Next slide, please. So prior to using the map, the SNOMED terms and codes would populate in the free text sections of the ADR case folder. And this would require manual classification using the MedDRA browser. So clinical terms can appear in different sections in our case folder, so adverse drug reactions, medical history, lab tests. And then we would need to manually classify each term into our database for it to be able to process the case. It's not very user-friendly, and it took a long time, as we will see in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So below is an example of the medical history screen from our database received from a GP clinical system. And each code represents a SNOMED term. And there's probably more than 30 codes here that we will need to classify manually in order to gain the full medical information of the case, to put it in our case folder. So I'm going to look at the code that's highlighted by the blue arrow, beginning 102244. So what we do is we would copy that SNOMED code and put it into the SNOMED website using Internet Explorer, as per the next slides. So we would put it into the search by code field and search for the term. And the resulting term will need to be searched in our MedDRA browser, as per the next slides. So we'd put it here. So the term that came up was full blood count. So the assessor would need to find the corresponding MedDRA term and choose the most appropriate term to enter into our database. So here we have the exact same term. So it was full blood count. So then we would go into our database and enter full blood count in the lab test screen. And then you can delete it from the comments, the free text that we had before. This would need to be repeated for all the SNOMED terms. So you can see that it's a very time-consuming task between going to the database, going to the SNOMED website, and then into the MedDRA browser, and then back into the database. So it's very time-consuming and not very user-friendly, and it took up a lot of time for each assessor to process one case that might have 30 SNOMED terms. Next slide, please. So below is an example of the medical history screen once the assessor has used the SNOMED website to find a suitable MedDRA term to put into the MHRA database. So this way, it brings up the full medical information of the case for that patient. For example, if you look at the 8th term down, which is breathlessness, in the SNOMED term, it would have come up as Medical Research Council Breathlessness Scale Grade 3, which I have entered into the comments section because there is no specific term that we have in the MedDRA browser. So if the assessor cannot find an exact term, the assessor will put the closest thing that they think, and then any extra information would be entered into the comments section. So that just shows that there's it's not completely aligned. So that's where we would enter any extra information that we need. Next slide, please. So these are the maps that have been developed. So it's a screenshot of a small section of the SNOMED to MedDRA map, which is an Excel spreadsheet which we import into our system, and then it allows the automatic mapping of terms. So for example, a SNOMED term of worn out, we don't have, we would code it to exhaustion. And this shows that potentially different assessors might enter that as different things. So they might enter it as tiredness, for example, or something else. However, it should be entered as exhaustion. So it just shows that there, before the maps, there might be some inconsistencies between cases, whereas after the maps have come through, it's done automatically for the majority of the terms that were piloted. Next slide, please. So after the mapping and using this, the mapping in our system, when we receive a case from the clinical database, the process of checking SNOMED website and checking the MedDRA web browser for the appropriate term, the majority of this work has now been removed as it's done automatically. However, it wasn't possible to map all the subsets of the 7,400 terms, given the different scopes of the two terminologies and the way they're structured. So some terms were unmappable, and this will be received as unmappable in MedDRA and will still need manual classification by the assessor, which was as previously done in the previous slides. So for example, in MedDRA, we have non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, but in SNOMED, it is non-ischemic congestive cardiomyopathy. So it's not an exact match. So we would enter what we have in MedDRA, and then we would just enter in the comments that it's congestive to add all that medical information into our case. Next slide. So there are many benefits to the mapping. As I mentioned before, it reduces inconsistencies so that multiple assessors can reach the same coding and it's not subjective. There's better quality of data because we're not changing the medical or clinical input of the healthcare professional. What they've inputted, it goes directly into our system without us having to analyze or search for the best term. You could see that it was very time consuming and inefficient, and it took a lot of time for assessors to process cases sometimes. So it cuts out a lot of data processing and allows us to be able to actually assess the case that we have. And it can be continually updated because MedDRA is upgraded twice yearly. The map can be routinely updated with the upgrade each year, twice yearly. Next slide, please. So the next steps for us at the MHRA is to continue to use the SNOMED to MedDRA map within our live case processing environment and feedback any insights to SNOMED and the MSSO. And hopefully with any updates, we can update them with the MedDRA upgrade twice a year. Next slide. And if there's any further information or questions that you would like, this is the dedicated mailbox at the MHRA where all the queries go to, and you can email here and you'll get a response back from the relevant person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Also very practical and concrete experience. And I think this leads us very nicely to some exchange around that. So the speaker and panelists may turn their camera on so everybody can see everybody. So I see there is a question which is in the course to be answered, but nevertheless, I think Jane, you were speaking earlier about EDQM standards for route of administration and those for ICSR. And the lady asking the question, Ursula, asked the coding used in here are the codes from IDMP. SPOR EDQM codes are different to those of SPOR pharmaceutical dose form and route of administration. Can you elaborate on that, Jane, perhaps?
I think the answer's been given there quite nicely. I am not an EDQM and SPOR expert, but I think what the requirements that the EMA have stated have been pointed to.
Thank you. Yes, I see now the trail. I didn't look.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Pardon me.
So thank you to others for actually helping out. Thank you, Anya.
Voilà. And there is a second question. Do you know any hospital in Europe that are using medication grouping without strength when prescribing internally? Also, in our experience, the internal prescription process requires administrable dose form as base of the grouping, and hence the clinical drug and medication product form is based on manufactured dose form, and hence will not meet the clinical need for grouping. Is this something you have identified?
That is not something I can answer. I don't know, actually. It's a very good question, actually. We can ask, I mean, I can come back to Ellen on that one if she wants to drop me an email, and we can take it to a drug extension user support group. I think Tony, you're on the call. Do you want to say something to this one?
Well, I do to the second part of the question about administrable dose form. We've identified that as an upcoming requirement that is likely to be one that we need to fulfill, but we don't have, as of yet, a way to model and provide that, but we are aware that that is very likely going to be a future need.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question? I don't see other questions in the Q&A box.
I did want to point out one thing for any of the more clinical side people that are on the call today. The examples that Jane and Ian showed were listing the SNOMED's fully specified names. We do have preferred terms for all of those concepts that are probably a little more clinician friendly, if you will. So I didn't want anyone to get hung up on those names, but that is how we do our fully specified names with all of the level of detail.
Thank you. That's helpful, Tony.
Very good. Any other question or comments? So one of the points which has been raised is the maintenance of this linkage between SNOMED and MedDRA, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, on the mid to long term, beyond UNICOM, are there plans to maintain this, or do we have resolved this?
It's okay. The SNOMED MedDRA maps are actually nothing to do with UNICOM in a sense that they haven't been done for the UNICOM project. They were developed a SNOMED to MedDRA, MedDRA to SNOMED map as part of the WebRadar 2 European project, which completed middle of last year. It completed as the pandemic hit us all. As part of that, ICH, which owns MedDRA, and SNOMED International committed not just to for the projects to be part of the products to be part of the project, but ongoing maintenance and updating. And we went out with an alpha release last April 2020, for both maps. And we have just done the production release this year in April, and they're going to be released now on an annual basis. So, and anybody who has either a SNOMED license or a MedDRA license can access those maps. And those maps are based on a high usage set of MedDRA content that the European Medicines Agency and the MHRA gave us access to. And we've set up our colleagues at the MedDRA MSSO. We've worked with them to put together a process for managing requests for changes to the maps and updating of the maps. Not updating, but changes to the maps and additions to the maps. So, but they will. Any additions to the map will be based on use cases which are actually for implementation, not theoretical. So, so yes, they're definitely out there for use now, and they're available for use within UNICOM, but actually for use in systems, as has been demonstrated by Sarah today.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that, as Jane
Oh yes,
said,
please do.
there is a change request process that's available to both MedDRA and SNOMED users. So if you're in a country that's affiliated to SNOMED, or if you're a subscriber to MedDRA, you can access that change request process. And those change requests will get reviewed. And if any of those changes are approved, there is a process for publishing that information, I think on a monthly basis. But there will be an annual update to the SNOMED map.
Thank you. Okay, it's good that we, keep on the long term the benefit of the collaborations. Yeah, that's very important. Good. Do we have another question? A question to our MHRA colleagues? So I have to look at participant if I have some hand raising. Usually that happens, but no, nobody has raised their hand. Okay, so if you don't have any further question, I don't want to imagine these questions just to fill 15 minutes. So any final word you want to say from the panel and the speaker, of course?
Not for me. No, thank you everybody for attending.
Voilà, then we are done. Thanks a lot. I thank you also the participants for having joined us. So you may just, before leaving, answer the questionnaire, which is now on your screen. Please do so. And that helps us to evaluate the benefit of our webinars. With this, thank you to everybody, the speaker, the panelists, for their engagements and their readiness. And I look forward to see you in about 1 month. The next month, we have, of course, late June, we have, of course, another committee of expertise before the summer break. And late August, we will have the following one. Information to be published. The data are not totally set yet, but it's going also to be a very, very interesting community of expertise. So thank you, and I hope you keep healthy and like me, and see you very soon in another opportunity. Goodbye and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.